The heat hung heavy over the stagecoach stop, dust swirling lazily in the late afternoon air as the sun bled across the horizon. Cole Maddox reined in his horse with a low whistle, boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. He wasn't one for detours. His life depended on staying ahead of the men hunting him, but something about the stillness gnawed at him. The stop was deserted, the bench empty, save for a figure slumped against the post. As he drew closer, he saw her, a young woman in a nurse's uniform, her pale face streaked with sweat and hair falling loose from its neat bun. Her white apron was dirty, and her small hands gripped a satchel as though it held her life. She stirred weakly but didn't open her eyes. "Damn it," Cole muttered, crouching beside her. Her pulse fluttered under his fingers, fast, fragile. He scanned the horizon instinctively. The stagecoach wasn't coming, and there was no help for miles. Leaving her here wasn't an option. He wasn't that kind of man, not yet. "You're coming with me," he murmured, his voice low and edged with steel. Slinging his rifle over his shoulder, he gathered her into his arms. She was feather-light, her head lolling against his chest as he lifted her onto his horse. He mounted smoothly, holding her steady as the animal shifted beneath them. "Easy, girl," he said to the mare, though part of it was meant for the unconscious woman in his arms. With one last glance back at the silent stagecoach stop, Cole turned the horse's nose toward the distant hills and kicked gently. Dust billowed behind them as they rode into the fading sun, the gunslinger wondering what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. Abigail awoke to the soft crackle of a fire and the scent of strong coffee mingling with wood smoke. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding her thoughts as she stared at the low wooden ceiling above her. The last thing she remembered was the stagecoach stop, her legs giving out as the heat clawed at her lungs. Now, she was lying on a narrow cot, covered with a rough wool blanket, her boots set neatly by the door. A sharp sound drew her gaze, metal scraping against leather. In the corner of the dim cabin sat a man, hat low over his face, meticulously cleaning a revolver. His movements were slow, precise, like a predator sharpening its claws. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. She pushed herself upright too quickly, the room spinning as she gripped her satchel protectively. The man's head tilted slightly, and for the first time, she saw his eyes icy blue, cold yet unsettlingly calm. "You're awake," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Good." Abigail's pulse quickened. Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "My cabin. Found you at the stage stop, half-baked in the sun. You'd have been vulture food if I hadn't come along." He set the gun down, leaning back in his chair. "Name's Cole Maddox. And you are—" She hesitated. "Abigail St. Clair. Nurse." Her fingers clutched her satchel tighter. "Why would you help me?" Cole's gaze didn't waver. "Guess I'm not as heartless as folks say." He rose slowly, his boots heavy against the floorboards, and poured a cup of water, setting it on the small table beside her. "Drink. You're dehydrated." Abigail's lips parted, her instincts telling her not to trust him. But as her parched throat screamed for relief, she reached for the cup with trembling hands. Cole watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. "Don't worry, nurse," he murmured. "If I meant you harm, you wouldn't be sitting there breathing." Abigail lowered the cup, her heart still pounding. Something about the man felt dangerous, like a coiled snake, but there was also something else in his voice, something she couldn't name. "Why me?" she whispered. Cole's jaw tightened, his gaze shifting to the fire. "Let's just say, I've got my reasons." The days passed in uneasy quiet, the kind where words hung unsaid like dust in the sunlight. Abigail moved carefully in the small cabin, her nurse's hands finding comfort in small routines. Wiping the table, sweeping the floor, checking the bandage on her own arm where she'd scraped it during her faint. Cole watched her with a guarded stillness, always perched near the window or fire, cleaning his gun or sharpening his knife, as if danger might burst through the door at any second. She studied him in secret moments, the slight limp in his left leg when he rose from his chair, the deep scar slicing across his jawline, and the way his eyes flicked constantly toward the door as though haunted by ghosts only he could see. "You've been in a fight," she said softly one evening as she stirred the pot of beans simmering over the fire. Cole didn't look up from the whetstone, dragging along his blade. "Been in more than a few," he replied, his voice even. "Was it always for money?" she asked, her tone careful. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Wasn't at first. Used to wear a badge. Didn't last." Abigail set the spoon down gently, her mind painting a picture of a man who had tried to stand for justice but had been broken by a world too cruel to care. She wanted to ask more, to press into the silence that wrapped around him like armor, but something in his posture warned her not to. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake on the cot, listening to the occasional creak of the rocking chair as Cole sat by the fire, revolver resting in his lap, blue eyes glinting in the low light. He didn't seem to need rest. Not really. Abigail wondered what kept him awake, what memories clawed at him when he closed his eyes. And though she barely knew him, a small voice whispered in her mind that the man cleaning his gun wasn't as heartless as he wanted the world to believe. The uneasy calm of the cabin shattered the moment a heavy knock rattled the door. Cole froze mid-step, his hand flying to the revolver at his hip as his eyes darted toward Abigail. She was by the table, her hands stilling over a loaf of bread she'd been slicing. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent like a fist demanding entry. "Stay behind me," Cole ordered in a low growl, his voice sharper than she'd ever heard it. Abigail's pulse raced as she backed toward the corner, clutching her satchel tightly against her chest. Cole crept to the window, parting the curtain just enough to glimpse the figures outside. 3 men, one in a long duster coat, a crooked grin splitting his weathered face as he leaned against the post with his shotgun, resting casually in the crook of his arm. Bounty hunters. Cole's jaw tightened. "Cole Maddox," the man outside called, his voice oily and mocking. "Thought you could hole up here, huh? We've been paid plenty to bring you in. Dead or alive, don't much matter to me." Abigail's stomach lurched. Dead or alive. She looked at Cole, seeing him now in a way she hadn't before. Not just a wounded man with quiet pain, but someone dangerous, someone hunted. Cole drew his revolver with calm precision, checking the cylinder. "If they get through me," he said without turning his head, "you run. You hear me, nurse?" Abigail swallowed hard. "I won't leave you." He gave a sharp glance over his shoulder, a flicker of something softer in his ice-blue eyes. "Don't argue. You're not ready for their kind of trouble." Then, with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd done this far too often, Cole stepped onto the porch, boots creaking against the weathered boards. Abigail crouched low in the corner, her heart hammering as muffled voices rose outside, sharp and cutting like knives. Then came the sound of a single shot. Silence hung heavy for a beat before it erupted into a storm of gunfire. The crack of gunfire ripped through the still air like thunder, shaking the tiny cabin's walls as Abigail pressed herself into the corner, her hands clamped over her ears. Through the thin wood, she heard Cole's boots thud heavily on the porch, his revolver barking out sharp, deliberate shots. The answering blasts came in a furious volley, bullets splintering the doorframe and sending dust raining from the rafters. Abigail's chest heaved as she fought to keep her panic at bay. She had seen blood before, war wounds, mangled limbs, but this felt different. This was survival. Another shot rang out, closer this time, and a grunt followed, low and guttural. Abigail's blood turned to ice. "Cole!" She scrambled to her feet and inched toward the door, her body screaming at her to stay hidden. A body lay sprawled in the yard, one of the bounty hunters with his hat knocked loose, a dark stain spreading across his chest. 2 more circled, their boots kicking up dust as they fired wildly at the porch. Cole staggered backward into view, clutching his side where a deep, crimson patch bloomed across his shirt. He stumbled against the doorframe, reloading with practiced but slowing hands. Abigail didn't think she couldn't. She grabbed the kettle from the stove, dumped the hot water into a bowl, and pulled a knife from her satchel before throwing open the door. "Get back inside." Cole shouted hoarsely, but his voice lacked its usual bite. Abigail ignored him, crouching low and dragging him back over the threshold just as another bullet ricocheted off the porch post. "You saved me once," she hissed, her fingers flying as she tore his shirt and pressed a cloth against the wound. "Now let me save you." Cole's face twisted in pain, but his eyes flicked to hers, surprised, vulnerable. "You don't know what you're getting into, nurse," he rasped. "Maybe I do," she shot back, her hands steady even as her heart pounded. The sound of boots thudding across the porch sent a jolt of fear through her, but Abigail gripped the knife tighter. If those men broke through, they'd have to go through her first. The cabin had turned into a battleground. Gunpowder clung to the air, the sharp smell mingling with the coppery tang of blood. Abigail's hands worked furiously, binding Cole's wound as bullets thudded into the walls. He winced, sweat beading on his brow, but his icy blue eyes stayed locked on the door. "They won't stop," he murmured. "Not till one of us is dead." Abigail met his gaze, her lips trembling but her hands steady. "Then we don't give them the chance." She moved quickly, overturning a table and dragging it against the door as a makeshift barricade. From outside, a voice growled, "Maddox, you can't hide forever. That nurse won't save you." Abigail froze. How did they know she was here? Cole's jaw tightened as he reloaded with shaking fingers. "They weren't hunting me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They were after me." Cole's head snapped toward her. "What the hell are you talking about?" For the first time, Abigail's calm cracked, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "There's a man in Carson City, a politician. He killed patients to cover his crimes. I found out. I was trying to get to the marshal's office when I collapsed at the stage stop." Cole let out a bitter laugh, even as pain laced his voice. "So, you're not some innocent little nurse caught up in my mess. You've got your own ghosts chasing you." She nodded, ashamed. "I didn't tell you because I thought you'd leave me behind." Cole's expression softened, his grip tightening on his revolver. "Listen to me, nurse. I don't leave people behind. Not anymore." A crash shook the doorframe as one of the bounty hunters threw his shoulder into it. Abigail grabbed the knife she'd hidden in her satchel and crouched beside Cole. "Then let's finish this," she said, her voice steely. For the first time, Cole allowed himself a small smile. "You've got grit. I'll give you that." The final moments came in a blur of smoke and violence. As the door cracked and splintered, Cole fired with deadly precision, dropping one of the men where he stood. The second lunged through the gap, shotgun raised, only to be met by Abigail's blade. She slashed instinctively, catching his arm and sending the weapon clattering to the floor. Cole rolled forward, tackling the man to the ground and ending it with a single, echoing shot. Then, suddenly, it was quiet. The only sound was Abigail's ragged breathing and the soft hiss of the dying fire. Cole leaned heavily against the wall, his strength fading fast. Abigail rushed to his side, pressing her hands to his wound again. "Stay with me," she whispered fiercely. "You're not dying here." Cole's lips curved into a weak smirk. "Wouldn't dream of it." When dawn broke over the hills, Abigail stepped outside and stared at the horizon. 3 lifeless bodies lay in the dirt, and for the first time in weeks, the air felt still, not with fear, but with possibility. Inside, Cole stirred on the cot, his eyes fluttering open. "Where to now, nurse?" he rasped. Abigail glanced back at him, her resolve hardening. "Carson City. That man has to answer for what he did." Cole chuckled softly, wincing at the pain. "Then we ride together." 2 wanted souls against the world. As they saddled the horse later that day, Abigail helped him into the saddle before climbing up behind him. They didn't look back at the cabin or the bodies they left behind. There was no past anymore, only the long road ahead. And for the first time, neither felt quite so alone.